Let's turn to a really serious and very worrying problem. Hand sanitizer could soon be placed under lock and key in the Northern Territory after Police Commissioner Michael Murphy discovered that people are drinking hand sanitizer. Evelyn, what does the need for a ban tell us about the social problems in the Northern Territory?
Well, this just shows that this is a symptom of a far greater problem. As a nation, I think Australia and a lot of nations in the West, we are very sick. We are very sick physically, we are very sick emotionally, we are very sick mentally and spiritually. And I think this is a symptom of that.
Hang on. We can do a quick survey with the people in the room. We're doing okay. There are problems in specific places rather than big social problems, aren't there?
There are specific niche problems everywhere, but the same problem is a lot of people are turning to things in our society to escape from reality because people haven't been given mechanisms to cope and et cetera. So we could dissect that psychologically, but it is an incredibly sad situation. You know, when I was in law enforcement, I did some work with Indigenous communities, and very sadly, I witnessed this firsthand. There were small children, like heartbreaking, who would walk around with blisters in a circle shape from their nose to the bottom of their lips because they would have old milk bottles filled with glue and they would be smelling them. This is a problem that's been around for a long time. Perhaps hand sanitizer, because of, you know, what we saw, it's more readily available, but sadly these problems have been happening for a while. I think the big elephant in the room is how we deal with these problems. And unfortunately, white men, like people, you know, like us who come from British ancestry, who came here as convicts, like we said before, our hands are kind of tied because if we're limited in what we're able to do to help these communities. And I think Jacinta Price has said this before, and you mentioned it as well, Kel, that we need to be looking at welfare, not by the colour of your skin or what your DNA, your blood ancestry says, but by what, you know, who's in need at the time, and get rid of that sort of racial lens. And in doing so, we and Australians could help these communities more. But if we, you know, we're seen as colonisers if we dare step into an Indigenous community and say they're not living how they should be living. I mean, as a police officer, I would be saving babies from situations. I remember, you know, there were drug addicts injecting their newborn babies because they were born with addictions, and I would go and take the baby from that situation, but I was the colonizer and you know, how dare I do this? And so we've had this horrible social perception if we dare try and help these communities. Yeah. And I think until we address that elephant in the room and until we scrap this idea that we're doing it because we're racist, we're not going to deal with the big problem.
Can I suggest it isn't really racist? I mean, I went along to the Matthew Talbot Hospital, which is a home for homeless men in Sydney, to do a story with the film crew once. And there was a chap there who introduced himself to me. He was a former ABC journalist, so I had worked with him years earlier, and this is where he got to. And while I was talking to him, he picked up a bottle of methylated spirits and began to drink from it. It was chilling. I mean, how can anyone do that sort of thing? But he had got into a position personally where he wasn't coping with life, and this is what he was doing. Now, you've got to worry when there are people of any race in any situation who get to that level of despair that all they can do is blot everything out.
Yeah, but those acts of despair are happening disproportionately in remote Indigenous communities. They are happening because of the lack of opportunities. They're happening because of terrible parenting. They're happening because shockingly high rates of abuse. And I think on the right, we need to have the courage to call this out and say that these are problems, they are backed by data, and we need to be able to address that. I think, Evelyn, you were exactly right in saying that this is an issue of courage on the right. I think we saw during the Voice campaign increasingly more people get the confidence to say that. But unfortunately, and the great tragedy of the Voice campaign is it used up all of the political capital in the Indigenous affairs debate. And now, when was the last time you really started hearing serious policy initiatives about Indigenous affairs from Albanese and co? They've not. They've moved on, despite it being the great moral challenge 8 months ago.
May I make one other point? Sorry, Kel, just about this. Another thing that I think is really important for us to identify and recognise is that we've essentially set up generations of children in these communities that we're seeing, you know, these unprecedented numbers in these Indigenous communities. We've basically told them through the Voice referendum that unless you have this and unless Australians vote yes to this, you've got no hope of ever having a voice in this country.
That's a really
And that's a really big thing for those kids being raised raised with that in the back of their mind. Not only have we said that to them, we've also basically said to kids in those communities that we all hate you, and that you've got no hope and no future. It's an unwinnable game. So of course they're going to step back and go, well, why would I bother if I try and it's not going to get me anywhere anyway?
Look, I'm not sure that's the message we've sent, but this is just the surface of a very big, complicated issue, and we can't deal with it all here.